You are now familiar with the definition of clauses and the features of clauses. You know that a clause is a unit of a sentence that has a subject-verb combination. A clause should have a subject part and a predicate part. The subject of a clause could be explicit or implicit. A clause requires a finite verb, a verb that indicates tense. This is what we have already discussed. Now we are going to discuss the different types of clauses. So this is a classification which we have already seen, that is the classification of clauses into independent clauses and dependent or subordinate clauses. We have already discussed that classification once, but let's take a look in detail into that classification. So the first type is independent clauses or principal clauses. As I already told you, they are clauses that can stand alone as sentences. They can stand alone as independent sentences. That is why they are called independent clauses. Independent clauses are also called coordinate clauses. Now, why are they called coordinate clauses? എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് independent clausesനെ coordinate clauses എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നത്? അതായത് നമ്മൾ ഒരു സെന്റൻസ് ഫോം ചെയ്യുന്ന സമയത്ത് ഇൻഡിപെൻഡന്റ് ക്ലോസസ് രണ്ടെണ്ണം ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അതിനെ കമ്പൈൻ ചെയ്യുന്നത് കോഓർഡിനേറ്റിംഗ് കൺജങ്ഷൻസ് യൂസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടായിരിക്കും. അതിനെപ്പറ്റി നമ്മൾ ഡീപ്പായിട്ട് സംസാരിക്കുന്നതായിരിക്കും. ഇപ്പോൾ കോഓർഡിനേറ്റിംഗ് കൺജങ്ഷൻസ് യൂസ് ചെയ്ത് ലിങ്ക് ചെയ്യുന്ന രണ്ട് ക്ലോസസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ രണ്ടിൽ കൂടുതൽ ക്ലോസസിനെയാണ് നമ്മൾ കോഓർഡിനേറ്റ് ക്ലോസസ് എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഇൻഡിപെൻഡന്റ് ക്ലോസസ് ആണ് എങ്കിൽ അവ എപ്പോഴും കോഓർഡിനേറ്റിംഗ് കൺജങ്ഷൻസ് ഉപയോഗിച്ചിട്ടായിരിക്കും ലിങ്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അത് കുറച്ചുകൂടി ഡീപ്പായിട്ട് നമ്മൾ സംസാരിക്കുമ്പോൾ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവും. തൽക്കാലം യു ജസ്റ്റ് റിമെമ്പർ ദാറ്റ് ഇൻഡിപെൻഡന്റ് ക്ലോസസ് ആർ ഓൾസോ കോൾഡ് കോഓർഡിനേറ്റ് clauses. Coming to the next type, subordinate clauses or dependent clauses. So they are clauses which cannot stand alone. They can't form a sentence on their own. They get meaning only when they are associated with the main clause or the independent clause. Dependent clauses often begin with subordinating conjunctions like whereas, after, though, because, etc. or relative pronouns like which, who, that, etc. So, എപ്പോഴും ഒരു ഡിപ്പെൻഡന്റ് ക്ലോസിന്റെ തുടക്കം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് it could be a subordinating conjunction like whereas, after, though and the like, or relative pronouns like which, who, that, etc. So, when we take examples, you will see this in more detail. Now, there are certain questions to be answered here. This is a practice activity from your textbook. Identify the principal and subordinate clauses in the following sentences. So the principal clause is the main clause or the independent clause, and the subordinate clause, you know, it is the dependent clause. So let's look at the questions. The first question, they sat under a tree after they had walked a very long distance. If you take a look, it's very clear that it has two clauses. The two clauses are they sat under a tree and after they had walked a long distance. So it is very obvious. The one that can stand alone is the first part. They sat under a tree. The subordinate clauses after they had walked a very long distance. Coming to the second question, I do not agree with what you said. So the two parts are I do not agree. The second part, with what you said. So once again, the independent clause is I do not agree, and the dependent clause is with what you said. Third question, Sumi wanted to give me a gift before I left for London. So here the two parts could be split like this. Sumi wanted to give me a gift is the first part. Before I left for London is the second part. So Sumi wanted to give me a gift is the independent clause, and before I left for London is the dependent clause. Coming to the fourth question, I first met them in Thrissur when where I lived as a child. I first met them in Thrissur where I lived as a child. So the two parts are I first met them in Thrissur and where I lived as a child. It's very clear. I first met them in Thrissur is the independent clause. Where I lived as a child is the dependent clause. Fifth question, after she picks me up from school, mother will take me to watch a movie. So the two parts could be split like this. After she picks me up from school is one part. Mother will take me to watch a movie is the second part. But unlike the questions we have answered so far, the independent clause is mother will take me to watch a movie. That is the clause that can stand alone as a sentence. And the dependent clause is given first after she picks me up from school. So you should not think that the first one, the first clause of a sentence is the independent clause and the second one is the dependent clause. It need not be like that. It can be in any order. You just need to check whether a clause can stand as an independent sentence or not. That is what you need to check. Coming to the sixth question, the old man was generous in helping people who were victims of the catastrophic flood. It's a long sentence. Two parts are, the old man was generous in helping people. The second part is, who were victims of the catastrophic flood. So the independent clause is, the old man was generous in helping people. And the dependent clause or the subordinate clauses, who were victims of the catastrophic flood. Coming to the seventh question, the students stood up when the teacher walked into the classroom. It can be split into two parts. The students stood up is one part. When the teacher walked into the classroom is another part. The first clause, the students stood up, is the independent clause. When the teacher walked into the classroom is the dependent clause. Eighth question, the girl who won the first prize is my cousin. So this is a bit tricky. You have to read the question very carefully. The girl who won the first prize is my cousin. This is how you have to read it. So let's take a closer look. The girl is not a clause when it is alone. Is my cousin is also not a clause, complete clause. Who won the first prize is a clause, but we know that it is not the independent clause because it begins with who. It doesn't exist itself as a sentence. So the subordinate clause, it is easy to identify who won the first prize. But what about the independent clause or the main clause? Here the main clause has been split and the dependent clause has been inserted in between the words. So the main clause would be like, the girl is my cousin, and the subordinate clause is who won the first prize. Coming to the ninth question, if we meet after class, we can go home together. So the two parts are, if we meet after class is one part, we can go home together is the another part. Here the independent clauses, we can go home together, and the dependent clauses, if we meet after class. Coming to the 10th, if you take medicines, you will be fine again. So obviously the independent clauses, you will be fine again, and the dependent clauses, if you take medicines. So I hope it is clear how you identify the main clause and the subordinate clause of a particular sentence. And if you take a look at these sentences, you can see that most of the subordinate clauses begin with conjunctions or relative pronouns.